Welcome to Season 4 of Under the Sisterhood, Women's March for Mental Wellness. This season, we're diving deep into the intersection of women's mental health and overall wellness, bringing you thought-provoking conversations every Friday. We'll explore a wide range of topics, including how mental health impacts every stage of a woman's life, the intricate connections between physical and emotional well-being, and the role of practitioners who champion mental wellness. This podcast celebrates women, their resilience, and the incredible contributions they make to our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today we're getting under the hood with Shubhra Sharma, a daughter, sister, friend, women's advocate, and the founder of CRIA Hair, a holistic hair wellness startup that champions minimalist, life-affirming products designed for women 40 plus. Her 30-year career highlights include empowering girls and women across cultures and economies by implementing literacy programs that increased women's literacy rates from 3% to 80% in some of the most economically depressed and violence-affected regions of India. Within a decade, Shubhra co-founded Khabar Lahariya, a groundbreaking rural women's newspaper that became the subject of the Oscar-nominated documentary Writing the Fire in 2022. She has led women and gender studies programs at premier U.S. institutions, including Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Shubhra's life and work are built on 4 core values: trust, empathy, connection, and community, the same values that strengthen and empower women. At the heart of every project and initiative she undertakes are grit and gumption, powerful qualities that she inherited from her mother and grandmother. Wow, welcome, Shubhra.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm so excited to be here and to sort of share and see where this conversation can take us today.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very excited. It's season 4, Women's March for Mental Wellness, and I know you've done so much on behalf of women, so I'm really excited to be getting under the hood with you. If it's okay, let's get going.
Yeah, let's do that.
Wonderful. I'm really curious. I mean, you have such an interesting journey and story, your introduction. I'm curious as to when that inflection point that got you sort of on that wellness track, that health and wellness, and in particular for women.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it was not just one thing. For me, it was sort of a cascade, right? It came fast and furious. And before I could even sort of process it, my body had kept this massive score. So really, it actually began for me in 2010. I was on a break. I was teaching at a liberal arts college in Connecticut at that time, and I was in a women's and gender studies program. Um, and I wasn't feeling really good. I still remember it was like Friday, the 17th of December. I was just waiting on my partner to come back from his travels. And I thought, well, I should just cook him a really great dinner and, of course, clean the house. So that's what I was doing. And I was in the bathroom, cleaning the bathroom. And I must have turned my head really fast, and the side of my head caught this ceramic towel hanger, so it hit my head so hard that I suddenly felt like, oh, that didn't feel good. And at the same time, my heart just dropped, as if it kind of knew that something had shifted. Um, so I kind of walked around a little bit in a daze the whole day, but I said, oh, I'm just going to go for a walk. Maybe that's going to sort of eliminate this feeling of like doom and gloom. Um, I came back, I cooked, but I had a really sort of restless night. And so I thought, I'll just go see my doctor. So I went and saw her. She said, outwardly, doesn't look like anything is bad, but I would suggest you go see a dentist. And I was like, why is she asking me to go see a dentist? Like, I hit my head. Um, and I didn't, and I think that was sort of the biggest mistake I made, which is not listening to the doctor, because obviously she felt like if something has hit your head, it's kind of affected your dental region as well. And so by the time I went to the dentist, the infection had set in. My whole body was kind of in this state of absolute panic. And when I went to the dentist, she said, like, oh, your tooth had sort of cracked in half. And, that infection spread to my whole body. And, there were days where I felt like I'm just going to die. I sat at my, my sort of sofa in my living room and with like an orange, glass of orange juice. And I kept saying to myself, I don't know what's happening. Like it was the scariest thing, So that was one thing which completely shifted the axis for my mental health at that time. And then in the wake of that came a few other things. I lost my job. I wasn't tenured. The year after, I lost my father. And the year after that, you know, President Trump came in. So that also affected my mental health in a way. Um, but I think for me, it has always been about how do I keep sort of sitting and standing upright, even in the face of such physical challenges, right? For me, it has been about um, asking for help, right? I didn't grow up, with that kind of messaging. My system was not trained to sort of say, I'm not feeling good. I need somebody to help me. I always felt like I could just do this all by myself. And that's not true. And that's something I had to learn and train myself and my mind to ask for help. So that's what I did. So beyond just, I think, traditional therapy, it was really building out this tool, of practices, self-care practices, spiritual practices, just so I can show up in the world, for myself and the people who were around me, sort of take care of them as well. But first of all, I knew I had to take care of myself.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry. That must have been really scary. Something as simple as hitting your head could have such tremendous impact. So I think that's a good message. But I think what's interesting to me about that, Shabra, isn't just it's the fact that something physical happened and the shift in the mindset in the mental health, because it is all about mind body. So do you want to talk a little bit about that journey? Because you said it was a cascade of things that happened. But during that cascade, that was sort of the beginning. Where was your head at that point? What was your mental health like as you were going through this, and how were you addressing it? I mean, you just mentioned the self-care, but like, what was the journey like?
No, those are great questions. So on the outward, so I asked for help. So I was in traditional therapy. I was seeking out other ways to take care of my mind, So if you could think of EFT, if you think about, practices like havening, breath work, also intuition building. I think for the longest time, I didn't sort of listen to what, generally people would say, listen to your gut. I didn't even know where in the world was my gut, right? And I was like, what is anybody talking? What is the gut? You know, knowing fully well that there was always a voice somewhere, in some part of my body that was kind of leading me to one ask for help, to find that help, to really have the presence of mind, to go do the research, what has worked for people, ask friends, if they've gone through that. And in that moment, start a conversation around mental health that is just nothing really much to do with me, but also people around me, right? Because everybody is going through something and they're just waiting for somebody to ask them that question, for them to kind of put it out and set it up on the table and then make it into an object of inquiry and say, yeah, I think that's troubling me as well. Why do you think that is? And I find that to be sort of the most human thing, that we can do, and also the most sort of woman thing that we can do, sort of that truth and the connection that comes in, at least at that particular moment. I also really gravitated towards poetry. The poetry of this Persian poet Ghalib, who was born in the same um, city that I was born in, but 2 centuries apart. And his level of depth, from where he spoke of feelings, and how intrepid he was, right? I think was very, very exciting to me. The other person that I think completely shifted my understanding of self was Isabel Eberhardt. She was this really young, vibrant person who had come in through a life that at the very outset was a very dualistic life, right? Like she was born to parents who came from completely different settings. One was a princess, and the other one, was a Greek Orthodox priest who had then become an anarchist, right? And she had been born at the time when the French had control over Algeria. So she found herself, really trying to find herself in the deserts of Algeria. And, she was in relationships, but she was never tethered, right? For her, freedom was everything. And the fact that she also dies in the desert from a flash flood, that always sort of got to me. And I was like, this is a life that is so untethered, so beyond meaning that I think it needs more exploration. And so I would teach that in my class. And I also had sort of created this course around homesick, traveling in search of home, and really sort of exploring the idea of what is home, especially for women, right? And what we think home is also part of the discovery of what it isn't. So yeah, so that it's been a journey.
Well, that's wow. There's so much to unpack there, and I don't even, in some ways, I don't know where to begin because I was going to ask you, like, I mean, you've done so much work in both educating women, girls and women in India, and then the work you've done in gender studies in the U.S. at university. And I think what just struck me was the work on studying what is home, in particular for women, because I think, and I was just having another conversation around psychological
Mhm.
safety. So I want to sort of get your take on what is home. And is there any sort of correlation in your mind towards mental health and wellness? So, as you started to define that and sort of teach or, sort of learn and grow all of the stuff that we do in the classroom.
No, that's an excellent question. I think one of the reasons I did sort of craft that course was because there were always students in my class who'd come from somewhere. They had left homes to come to this place and be in this place, and often feeling completely sick, like literally physically sick, but also spiritually sick. Like they didn't know how to belong, right? Like the idea of home is always about belongingness and also about betrayal, right? Because we feel like home should be that place where we feel the safest. But for a lot of us, for me, it was not the safest of places. It was always a place that I was running from. So for me, the disconnect from the home was always very, very profound. And so all my life, I've been homesick, literally, and I've always traveled in search of home. So in a way, traveling for me became home. Like, when I was not traveling, I was homesick, but when I was traveling, I was at home with myself, right? And that led me to really ask this question of, as a woman who grew up in India, where, your body is kind of not your own possession, right? It belongs to everyone and everyone outside of yourself. And everyone thinks they have claims, over your body. They think that somehow they can treat it, dance with it, hold it, possess it in a ways that um, seemed really weird to me at that time, even growing up. Um, so for me, I think really asking the question of what then does it mean to be alone, right? What is aloneness for a woman who can never really be alone in the traditional sense, right? So my life's project has been really trying to discover for myself what that aloneness means in a spiritual sense by actually being alone. I don't have children. I don't know if it was a conscious decision or an unconscious decision because I didn't want to bring kids into this world. Um, and traumatize them in the way that, I had been traumatized in the space of the home, right? I didn't want to bring a child in who didn't feel safe in the home. And for some reason, I thought that just because I had these patterns that I had unconsciously absorbed from my parents, that I would transfer them to this child. Like I've seen my brothers do this, right? Um, so hurrah for me that I thought that somehow I shouldn't be doing this, and to not do this actually was a revelation even to me. I had friends often ask me, it's like, how did you do that? Like, how did you not have a child? Isn't that for us very subconscious? Like as women, we are just subconsciously, genetically trained to procreate, right? So I
Mm.
was like, I don't know, maybe that's a gift. I don't know. So really sort of exploring that aloneness has been a journey for me.
Well, I think that's it. That first of all, it's fascinating. And what I'm curious about, you referred to a little bit earlier that you ran away from home. So, what age were you when you ran away from home to come to the US? And I really think this notion of aloneness and finding yourself in aloneness, and I don't know if you find safety in aloneness, comfort in aloneness, but I think I would like to first understand what age you were when you came from India, and then sort of what has transpired, because this is fascinating to me, particularly as women, as we continue, as we continue to age and go through life, and the aloneness experience. So if you could share that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, when I say like ran away, it's for me, it's almost like the concept of home, right? So it's like saying, oh, I started to work with the women's NGOs in as soon as I graduated. And these were again friends of mine, who were sort of on their own mission to empower women, but they wanted to do that through education, and a different kind of education, that would address women's like lived realities, and help them find their home, that they could stand alone and proud and still feel like, they could contribute to their communities, right? Um, so that was one thing. And I think for me also, trying to find home in the most unlikely of places, right? Like I used to live with this group of friends, when I graduated. A lot of my friends actually had been married off by that time, right? I'd been sort of asked to consider the idea of meeting somebody and getting married in that traditional sense. And, you know, all my life I've not been ordinary, right? This is something I've always lived a very extraordinary life by design or by intention. And I think that in some ways has served me well, but has also left me alone in many, many, many different ways. But something that I have owned it for myself, that my power lies in being alone. And in that aloneness, I've been able to ground myself, to tell myself the ways in which I can be safe here, that if there are no systems of power and control, that I'm responding to, then I'm safe, then I belong to myself, right? um,
Love that.
and I think for me it was always about, my idea of home and what I experienced in a home were two very different things. To sort of grow up in a home where you just felt unseen and not visible. For me, visibility has to do with being loved, right? Visibility has to do with having the attention of something or someone. Visibility has to do with um, somebody saying, I love you, I'll take care of you, and I will guide you. And I sort of didn't have that. And I think I've always searched that outside of myself in a person, an idea, a project, even a country. That's why I came here to the United States in a way to be like, okay, can I find a home here? Like, what would that look like? Um, and very quickly realized that my home literally was in the spaces and the caverns of my mind and my heart, right? And for the longest time, I think my mind had denied my heart sort of the attention that it deserved. So my heart had, in fact, sort of shriveled up. Like I closed my heart to a lot of things on the outside. And very quickly realized that, the heart has probably 100 times the electromagnetic power than the brain does. So if my heart is not open, then I'm not opening myself to experiences that can further elevate me, like, on this spiritual journey. So yeah.
Wow. I'm just sitting here. I need to almost take a pause with that. There's so much to what you're saying, and because, it's really loneliness is, it's a huge mental health issue, but you're looking at loneliness, you're looking at aloneness in a different kind of way, which is really sitting in your inner world, your spiritual world, who you are as a human. And I think to me, again, it's really interesting, this connection with home as a concept or a construct, if you will, versus home, like the home we are raised in and what have you. Almost having to create that construct is sort of a survival mechanism, if you will. for a way to
Yes.
thrive, right? And so I think,
Yep.
and I think that the references or the comments you made, Shabra, around, whether it's projects, people finding home in different things. I mean, that really resonates with me. I've never thought of it that way.
Hmm.
Because I think that that takes you from, and I don't know that being alone and lonely are two different things. So just
Yes. Yeah.
talk a little bit about that, like from your perspective and from also, I'm kind of curious, as you've been on this alone journey and finding and going into your inner world, how is your mental health and how is your well-being in this construct?
No, that's a great question. So you're right. There's a difference between lonely and alone. And that's the difference I had to tease out for myself. For the longest time, I would just sit beside my bed and cry and say, like, oh my gosh, like I am so lonely. There is no witness to my life right now. There's nobody to hug me or to take care of me or to do things around me that make me feel like I belong? Um, but I think that was sort of the necessary first step, you know, to feel that alone, to feel lonely, for me to come back to examining what does aloneness mean for me and what has it done for me, right? And I felt like what it has done for me is to literally just sit with myself, right? Often, the fact that we kind of mirror ourselves in the eyes of others and therefore we see ourselves through their eyes, right? We don't carry our own mirrors, right? We're not looking at ourselves and saying, oh, this is what I look like on a daily basis. We don't do that. We look at other people in the way they're looking at us to understand us. And that's sort of the pattern, right? Whether it's in a job, whether it's in the eyes of a friend, whether it's a meetup, whether it's talking to an investor, whether it's talking to, women who have been benefited by CRIA, it's almost like they are the ones who are affirming and confirming to you who you think you should be, right? And the way you think about yourself, it has to be different than what others think about you. And that can only happen in the context of aloneness, like sitting with yourself, maybe out on the balcony, under the moonlight, with nothing except the sounds of the night. That's the moment you meet your subconscious. That's the moment you meet what I would call your soul, right? And in that moment of meeting, you realize that you are really not lonely, right? And that you had to be alone physically to be able to have that moment. And then everything turns, right? For me, that was the turning point where I was just like, you know, I would just hug myself and say, wow, you did so great. You did so great, right? All this life, you felt like there was nobody for you, but yet you were protected, yet you were safe, right? You traveled to places that no girl, at least in my, cultural context, in my extended family, has ever traveled. Like I've come across seven seas, to find these set of experiences. I've taken the jump and I've done while being absolutely fearful, but I haven't let fear sort of define what my next steps were. I have jumped, and I think I've learned from jumping too often that yes, you can fall and you can hurt yourself, but you also ultimately have built that capacity to take on pain in a way that a lot of people may not. And in that way, you have extended the boundaries of what you can do. So for me, I think that realization has been exactly how I've come home to myself, how I have come home to Shubhra, and Shubhra has become a complete person.
I love that. I love that. And I'm very curious because as you talk about this aloneness and self, you're talking about self.
Mhm.
However, you've been teaching gender studies, you've been teaching women, so you're clearly teaching the collective. And I'm curious as to how do you approach this when you're dealing with more than self and you're dealing with a group, a community of women who could very much, I mean, this is about building inner strength and core and infrastructure and scaffolding within because of the self-discovery. So how do you do that as a teacher?
No, that's an excellent question. I feel first and foremost, I'm just a very empathetic person. And I borrow that from my mother. She's a healer. She's been a doctor for the longest time. And I've seen how she's transformed like lives. over the course of the last 40 years that she's been practicing homeopathy, and how people always sort of come to her, maybe not even to take a medicine. I think she herself is a medicine to them because of the way in which they share and the way she listens. Um, and as a teacher, I think if my standpoint is empathy, then I know that I'm going to position myself in a way where I will first and foremost listen to what a student has to say, right? And often students would come to me, and they're not just women students, they're also male students who would come to me and feel that they could be vulnerable in that moment because I will hold space for them, right? And I will hold space in a way where they could share this and know that they could walk away with like maybe a moment of understanding themselves that they didn't have before, and that they could then come back and maybe extend that understanding more. I think my course on homesick and traveling in search of home did exactly that. There were students who would come in and say, "I am not feeling like I belong here." Like, college was not feeling like home to them. And so I was like, okay, let's talk about that. So we would talk about their idea of home. And then I would share about the kind of disconnects I've had. So in that moment of disconnect, we would connect, right? That it doesn't have to be, our idea of home doesn't have to be a general idea of home, and that we don't have to buy into it, that we can have very individual experiences of home. And each one of them is valid, right? It's all legitimate because it's me. I am feeling this. I am saying this. This is my truth. And if I can speak my truth, then I can live with my truth, right? And maybe in a way shift things around it so I can feel better about myself. I can ground myself and I can give myself permission to do things that sort of take me away from home. And that's okay too, right? Traveling is piece of that. Like it allows you to say, this is my home. I understand I have a disconnect with it, but I can actually move away from it, right? And maybe in that sense, I can also keep coming back to it, but in a very different way because I would have a very different relationship with myself. That's what traveling does. It creates a very different relationship even with yourself, right? Experience is everything. You can't theoretically understand life. You have to experience it and understand it in a way that it makes sense to you. So, and the second thing I would do is, really allow them to go in the direction that their core is telling them to do, right? One of them just wanted to go travel the Alps. It's like, I just want to go trekking and I want to write about it. Can I do that? And I was like, do you think you can do that? There are two things here. Do you want to do that? And the other one is the ability. I think you have the ability to do it. But what you're saying is that there are too many things around my college going experience that I have to consider before I can allow that to happen. So I was like, let's look at some of those problems, right? Just like, I don't want to disappoint my parents. They're paying for my college education. It's an expensive school. What if I go, they're going to be disappointed in me. So I was like, let's set that aside. Think about what's going to make you happy. Is it going to build capacity? Is it going to build skills? Is it going to build your writing skills? What do you think you can do with those writing skills as you go forward? And the technical pieces of that are easy to resolve, right? Where you could say, I can take a semester off. I can explore this idea. I can see where that takes me. Let me see what I feel about it. And you can come back to me and we can talk more, right? So it's really breaking down these pieces of the self that somehow keeps us away from what we want to do. And I think I was very, very good at that. And I say that with a lot of humility as well, because this is a skill that doesn't have to do with my PhD. This is not to do with the fact that I'm highly trained and expert, but I've also worked around and listened to people, um, like really listened, where they've felt like they've been listened to, so that now they can do that work for themselves as well.
Well, that's exactly what I'm hearing, no pun intended. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm but I'm like, that's because she's really listening to people. When people feel seen and heard, magic opens up. And I think, and I'm hearing, interestingly, I'm hearing home in many different capacities, the literal home structure, right? So the notion of you travel and then you come home to a physical thing, but also, the home itself, which is, I, is that a spirit? I don't, it's not metaphor,
Yeah.
but you get what I'm saying. So it's looking at home in many different capacities. I also kind of wonder, like, just as a teacher, professor, and with all the work you've done, have you looked at home collectively as you deal with communities and stuff? Because I think, hearing you comment, and this is just very intriguing, this conversation to me, hearing you comment about creating these, holding these safe spaces, to me, that feels like home, a collective home. So,
That's an excellent question. To be honest, I was actually thinking of it like yesterday. I woke up with this feeling of like, could I, you know, take a course like, homesick traveling in search of home, but really pull that into building this community of people who are coming into Austin right now and are obviously feeling very homesick. Like I've very recently met people from like Norway and Sweden, from Cameroon, and everybody seems to talk about how they miss home, yet they cannot return home. Um, and so that's the question that I've been asking myself. Could I create that safe place and build this sort of collective where people can be home and at the same time also start to redefine the very idea of home within themselves, right? But do it in relation to each other, right? And I think I'm positioned really well to kind of really set
yeah.
that up right now. Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I was just taking notes in search of home. But I think that another thing I might suggest, which is
Hmm.
it's not just the people coming who are literally homesick from moving from one place to another, but you can be homesick and not have moved at all because you never found home. And so, finding home, in search of home, is in search of sort of your inner world, right? I mean, and so I think,
Absolutely.
I think that there's something big there. I think you're onto something. So yes, yes, and yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm curious, not to, because time is, as we're moving forward, is moving on. How are you marching for mental wellness, Shubhra?
Great question. Two ways. One, of course, is by reaching into the recesses of my own mind. I want to march for myself. I want to wake up doing that for myself. I want to have thoughts that make me feel like this is going to be great, right? But also at the same time to convey that, to my family members, right? Because I have two siblings, I have two brothers. We've also lived in the same home, even though we may have had different perceptions and interpretations of it, but there is a profound disconnect there too. So I feel like I also need to keep sharing and keep that outflow of what I'm understanding about home to kind of move into my traditional home as well, and to share that with my brothers, and also to share that with my nieces and nephews, and I call them the new humans, in my family because they are the new humans. Um, and I think I pay very specific attention to these new humans. Um, and I have the same practice of really listening to them, right? And there are moments where, if my 6-year-old nephew is kind of at his dinner table and eating, I very consciously would make the decision to go and just sit by him. No words, no touching, no sharing of anything, just sitting by him. Because I wanted him to feel like just the presence of me is going to be okay, that he is safe, that we don't have to share anything in that moment. That 6-year-old doesn't need to feel the weightiness of an adult sort of sitting at the table. They need to feel like it's easy, it's fun, it's like I can say anything and it's going to be okay, to feel safe. And that you can do just by being there. So that's what I consciously do. And the other thing that I do for them is two things. One is the practice of havening or tapping, where, just about as they're about to go and sleep, I would do that work for them, which is just touch that is calming, that makes them feel safer, that makes them feel like, oh, they can get into a dreamland and nothing is going to get them in that space. So I do it from, and then also if there are certain things or ideas that have been trapped in their minds at that early an age from whatever they are looking at, right? Whether it could be the TV or something that an adult said or a teacher said, to be able to bring that forth and say, like, this is my biggest fear. So once they bring it forth, then they say, oh, actually, it is not that much of a fear, right? And then when you're also doing the tapping and the havening, then they're able to feel calm in their bodies. The body is not yet trying to keep so many scores that they won't be able to deal with it at some point of time. Um, and then, of course, with just the women in my life, my friendships, I call them like my soulmates. Women that I may not talk to for the next couple of months, but when we do, we go all out, right? It's like just being there for each other in those 2 hours that we are, laid bare. Our lives are laid bare, we are laid bare, and we know that we are doing it for each other and doing it very safely so that each one of us can get up at the end of that conversation, carry on with our lives, but with a sense of empowerment again, and feeling that somebody has my back, right? Even though you're not literally there, like in words and spirit, you're there. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I think, what I'm hearing, your through line with everything is not just coming home, but coming home into safe spaces, these spaces you can
Mm-hmm.
really see and hear people, which is wonderful. I'm curious as we do this, and we haven't brought up CRIA Hair, what compelled you to go into that space and to create that business? You've been on such a soul searching journey, if you will, coming home to coming to hair. You want to talk
Yes,
about
yes.
that?
No, that's great. So very recent, I think I shared this with you too when we first talked, which is, my whole work, my whole life's work has been trying to ask the question, like, what is a woman? Um, and therefore, I have only ever worked with girls and women, whether they were in some of the most economically depressed regions of India, or they were within the women's and gender studies programs, again, very minority programs within sort of the US educational structure. And then now with CRIA, which is about aging, and aging and wisdom. But you're also right. I think it was me trying to, by making women's lives visible and asking them the question of what is it that they want, right? Um, in this lifetime that they've been brought into, and across the board, across cultures, uncategorically, women have said respect and dignity, right? They have never once said, I want more money, or, I want more love, or, I want my children to do A, B, or C. It has always been respect and dignity. And to me, that meant I need to be seen, I need to be listened to, and I need to be seen as somebody with full human capacity to be able to experience and understand and talk about the world that makes complete sense, right? And so I started there, which was really building out curriculums for women so they can empower themselves, but also, and something you said already, which I hadn't thought of before, which is making them feel safe, right? When you feel empowered and you can stand up for yourself, like a woman farmer, whose lands had been dispossessed, who had, lost sort of her credibility in the village because most of the time she would run away from a challenge. And for her to stand up, like build a community, find the right information that is going to help us get her lands back, and to stand up and say, this is mine, nobody can take this from me, or to see a hand pump mechanic, right? An untouchable woman coming from a tribal region to go 20 miles, taking every single piece of a pipe that is required to set up or repair a hand pump, which is how women and, people in the villages draw water from. And most of the time they have, lain waste pretty much because the government is apathetic. They do not come in and repair any of this stuff. So we had trained these women to go and repair these hand pumps, and they would go and do that, facing such resistance initially, because obviously, water is a source of purity and pollution. right? And that's what the caste system is kind of built on. So an untouchable woman coming in to repair your hand pump is not going to do it for people who very clearly follow hierarchical lines. But they sort of powered through that because in the absence of help, who else are they going to go to? A high caste village henman cannot say that you cannot repair my, water pump because they're going to be without water. So the very fact that we train these women that kind of break that first line of resistance. And once they repaired it and did so successfully, then to be able to have this montage where these tribal low caste women are sitting across from a high caste village headman and having tea. That's not happened in centuries of sort of the Indian existence, if you will, right? And we did that in the course of like a decade to visually see the fact that shift can happen, that change can happen, and it can happen in my lifetime. I think was the most empowering thing for me, right? So it was not just an empowering thing for the women in the villages, but it was a very empowering thing for me. And that led me to um, just almost automatically do things that were always soothing women, empowering women. I started CRIA not as, Scout Care for menopausal women. I started this as Scout Care for everyone, but I eventually rebranded it to mean, empowerment for women. And how do we even understand aging? Like, why is aging sort of the bad word, right? Why is it the F word? It shouldn't be, right? It is something that in a lot of cultures, at least that's where I came from, it was a sign of respect. It was a sign of wisdom. And I think I wanted to transfer that to the idea of building a brand for women that borrows from it and is anchored in it. So really, again, building this brand required talking to women, who were aging, who were feeling completely unanchored, did not feel they were at home at all in their bodies. Because obviously, when we are hitting menopause, our body is kind of revolting against us, right? It's like body itself is not a safe place to be in. You want to escape it. You're like, how do I escape this with, medicine? How do I escape it by harming it? How do I escape it by completely ignoring it? Right. And my challenge here was how to make women feel that just by adding, four organic ingredients to your scalp, you're going to soothe your parasympathetic nerve system. That's how you get to have an opening to come home. And that's how you get to sit in the home and say, this is going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. Right. So that I think was my challenge. And I think I have been very successful in meeting that challenge and creating something which is that pure, aligns with a woman's body, makes them feel that they can be home and menopause is not a disease and we are not mad.
I love it. I just love this theme of coming home. And I love the fact that you were able to, as you've been on your journey, again, it's the through line, but applying it even to building out a brand and a product line, that it's for women, it's coming home for women. And so that's wonderful, Shubhra. You should be really, I really admire you. You should
Thank
be
you.
really proud. I'm curious. I mean, I could talk to you forever. I'm curious. This is your platform today to give a message to women of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all cultures. What do you want to share with them?
To not be afraid to be alone, make that an intentional thing. Um, Even if you can be alone for 15 minutes, right? In a space where there is no distraction, there is nobody calling out your name, there's nobody asking for something, where you are not asking anything of yourself either, where you can just be with yourself with a hand on your heart and be honest, be honest about all the feelings that are coming up, be honest about, what you want to happen, what you don't want to happen, but just be with yourself. I think that's where you will meet your consciousness. And it's brilliant when you meet that, when you meet yourself, like the deepest part of you, when you meet that, that can only happen in silence, that can only happen um, in solitude, that can only happen when you have that intention that I am good, I'm good to be alone. I'm good to be in a community, that these are choices that I can make, and these are choices that are valid choices.
Wow. Amazing. There's no comments. I'm just sitting here and I think it's a wonderful message. I'm all about being alone, and I love solitude. I love my solitude. So thank you. Thank you so much for getting under the hood with us today, Shubhra. I wish you just
It's so much.
so much home.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have enjoyed this so much. This is exactly how I'm able to kind of really build out. I feel like maybe if I was to do a public talk or to build that community, this has given me a leg up in a way that I feel very empowered today.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That means the world to me. That's my goal, is to really celebrate you and all of the amazing work you've done out in support of women, but also on self in self, because when we do that work for self, we're role models, and we there's that ripple
Yes.
effect, one life and the next life and the next life. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood LLC and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Matt Butler, and edited by Matt Butler. The music is by Ayla Schaefer. Her song, Rose.